Miliastra is still pretty new of a platform, and right now we have a pretty limited amount of tools we have for the UI. But because Miliastra UI is based on Unity Richtext, we can actually do a lot of cool stuff with it by applying some basic tags. So today I'm going to teach you guys how to kind of use all the tools that is currently available to make your Miliastra look more premium. And to kick things off, we're just going to be replicating the pop-up window from Miliastra itself, as a way to learn more about the Unity rich text. Because there will be a lot of text in this part, to make things easier, I will give you guys all the text right here in a document you can just copy and paste. The first thing we will be making is the background, which we will be using mostly the square special symbol. You can find all kind of special symbol just by searching them up online, and only limitation is your imagination. And let's add the color tag and also the size tag to make the square big and blue. If we just duplicate this initial layer a couple times and place them in the right place, we can create a solid background we can use for our pop-up window. Next, to make this pop-up window look less flat and less plain, we're going to decorate it with a few more symbols. A small tip here is, if you kind of get used to stacking different symbols behind each other, you can create some interesting looks. And now with the background done, let's add the title. This time, while we still need the color tag for it to actually have a color, we don't really need the size tag. The font size itself is not the most flexible, but for this it's good enough. We're also going to add a separator right below the title. Now, this line symbol I'm using in the separator is going to be one of the most useful special symbol in any of the Miliastra, right next to the square, as this line symbol will be connected to itself when you put it next to each other. And let's also add the content right here, which I myself is just also gonna copy and paste. A big thing to note here is we have a 8-digit hex code here for a color. We use 8-digit hex code instead of 6. The last 2 digits will represent the transparency of the layer. And now let's actually add something functional, which are buttons. The first button I'm adding here is actually completely useless because I didn't attach it to anything later. And the second button here we're making will actually help us close out the window. And the last thing we will be working on this UI itself is to put them into a combination and turn them into a template we can use later. Now, to actually pull this window up, we need some trigger, which we will just make a torch with a tab component. And finally, let's work on the node graph. First, we need a when tab is selected to catch the event. And for me personally, even when there is only one tab, I still add a multi-branches in order to filter the actual response. And when the event is triggered, we just need to activate the UI control group in control group library. Very important note here is the selector entity from the when tab is selected is actually the character instead of the player. And the UI itself is attached to the player, so you will have to convert that entity before using it. And this node graph will go on the torch, which holds the tab. Next, let's make the node graph to close this window. Now, to do this, we will need when UI control group is triggered, which can catch button presses. And we will filter through the index number of the close button. Once that button is pressed, we will then turn off the UI group. And this node graph goes onto the player. And just like that, we have created a pop-up window that is fully functional and also is aware when it's open and close. Now, if you have played my previous project, Solo Stacking, which you absolutely should, you will notice that there was a different version of the pop-up I used that was full screen. But there is supposedly no such component in the current version of Miliastra. So how did I do that? Well, if you create a DAG selector and strip it of literally everything, you now have a fully functional background that can also pause the game in single player. And you can add tons of stuff onto it, like text, like item, like even skill button if you want. But you will have to make them into their own template separate of the DAX selector. This is because DAX selector is pulled up in a completely different way compared to regular UI. Just like before, we're gonna create another torch with a tab that can be used as the trigger. And in the node graph, after tab event is triggered, we'll be using invoke DAX selector. An important note here is that even though it doesn't stop you from saving, it is important to connect all the lists into an empty list, otherwise things will break. And after we pull up the DAX selector, we also need to pull up the component for the display separately. And of course, we'll add the node graph to the torch. To catch the closing event, we will need a when DAX selector is complete. And again, even though we only have one DAX selector in our project, it is good to always have code checking for which one is closed. And when this DAX selector is closed, we'll also remove all the other UI content with it. This is another node graph that needs to go to the player. And just like that, we have created our full screen pop-up. Okay, so everything we have made so far are still static. And in my game solo stacking, you will see a lot of time when you get new stacks, there will be text popping up right next to the player's head. But we all know currently there's no way to move the UI components, right? So how did I do that? Well, the truth is they are not actually UI components. Instead, they are empty models with nameplate attached to it. Let's first create an empty model and turn off the collision. You don't need this thing lifting the player up. Next, let's add some variable to hold a random hex code, which you guys actually don't have to copy. I'm just doing this for fun. If you guys want, you can make your own color, or if you don't want, you can just not put a color on it at all. Next, let's add a zombie onto the field, and we're going to use that as a reference to add an attachment point to this object, which I want this text to be spawned right next to the player's head. And after that, we are going to switch the nameplate's attachment point to this newly created one. Lastly, we will add a basic motion device that moves this entity up and make it initially effective before saving it as a prefab. This time, we will need to catch an uncreate event on this prefab, and just like I said before, if you don't want to, you don't need to add this random hex value composite node, and if you're interested, I have this on the resource center. But the most important part of this node graph is to add a self-destruct logic through a timer, which we'll set to 1.5 seconds. And once the timer hits, it will trigger destroy entity on itself. And once again, we're going to create another torch with a tab that we will use to spawn the scholars. This time, the node we'll be using is called create prefab, and we will need to forward the location and rotation of the player for it to spawn in the proper place. And now we can spawn a bunch of floating text from this torch. For the last part of this guide, I want to kind of showcase how to make this cool console animation which I made in the solo stacking game. Funny thing is, there is actually no variables on this UI. What you're looking at is literally one after another UI turning on and off. Now first, let's just make some cool transparent background, which should be very easy to do. And just like earlier, I'm just gonna give you guys the entire text in the document so you guys can just copy and paste. What I give you guys is only the final frame of this, which I also think is the best way to do this, because for this part, we will be working backwards. Let's first duplicate this frame 7 more times so that we have 1 layer per frame. And we're going to work from the last frame to first and slowly deleting more of the content to simulate the loading. And once the work are done, we're once again going to be turning that into a template we can use. we're also going to be turning off the initial visibility on all the frame except the first. And for the last time in this guide, we're gonna create another torch with tab. This time, however, we need two variables on this torch. First, we need an integer to track the current frame the animation is playing at. Additionally, we also need a reference to the player so we can update this animation. For the node graph, we'll first again turn on this UI group. Additionally, we will also be turning off the tab for now so that we don't have players double tapping it, creating multiple duplicated timers. After that, we're gonna activate timer that will control the animation flow. Some of you guys might notice the distance between each frame is slightly different. This is just because I wanted to simulate that stutterness a command prompt will usually has because it is actually running something. And we'll also be holding a reference to the player's entity, which is very important because this is how we will be updating the UI. Now for the timer event itself, other than the check for it to be the right timer, we'll also have another double branch with a last. What we're checking here is if this is currently the last frame, since we need the last frame to be doing something completely differently. Now, there is something very important to know for this next part is that when you create a template, the UI component inside will have consecutive indices. And that will actually allow us to get the indice of each of the UI by simply doing a subtraction through the frame. So for this next part, we're just gonna do that and use the indice to turn on and turn off UIs. Do know there is a slight delay when you turn UI on and off, so for my case where things are overlapping, I want to turn things on first before turning things off. Otherwise, it's actually just better to change variables. And now when we reach the final frame, we'll be turning off the UI, resetting the frame count, and also turn the tab back on. And just like that, we now have a boot up sequence in Miliastra Wonderland. Now, that was the guide, but before I go, I do want to leave some homework. I want you guys to update the funnel animation so that when it's finished, it will go into a looping animation. This looping animation will not have any UI turning on and off in the process. Instead, it should be done through only variable updates. And also, I want you guys to add a end animation tab to the torch that only activates when the loop starts. That will then turn off the loop and re-enable the load animation tab. I will be uploading the final version of this Miliastra. I will be uploading this entire Miliastra into the resource center, which include the homeworks. But still, I think if you guys can do this exercise yourself, it would be much better as a learning experience. Anyhow, that was the tutorial, and I hope you guys enjoyed. And as always, this has been SteamBunX. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.